So apologies to those that joined in the first session this morning. I see a few names that weren't on the call earlier, so I'm just quickly going to run through and set the scene, and then we will kick off. This is session 2 of 4, and as with the previous session, the recording and transcript will be shared with all attendees after the call. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So just as a bit of background, so the program obviously recognizes the value in capturing lessons learned from the delivery of MHHS SIT, and does have a responsibility to document these insights into supporting the delivery of future industry programs of a similar nature. We'll be undertaking internal retrospectives, but we also acknowledge that with participant test teams potentially rolling off, we look to schedule these sessions over these 2 days. We've given session focus suggestions. So we started off this morning with CIT, SIT-F, SIT migration. This afternoon, the session focus is settlement testing. Tomorrow morning, we'll be looking at NFT and PIT, and then in the afternoon, SIT-Ops, environments, defects, and release management. As we stated earlier on, the session focus is pretty loose. We are suggesting these, but if there are other topics that you want to bring into any one of the sessions, then please go ahead. So these are sessions for you as industry participants to consider positive and negative experiences. So what went well, what didn't go so well, how those items may have impacted you as participants individually, and how you saw that impact to the program overall. And we're looking for constructive suggestions as to how things could be done differently in future programs to improve on those observations that are raised. So we're looking to be constructive, consider what we've learned and what we could pass on to those future teams. As I say, the focus areas of each sessions are loose in nature. So if you want to raise any item outside of the session focus, that's fine. Just raise your hand if you want to contribute to the discussion, and then we'll come to you in order. For the session earlier, we suggested some topics just to keep the session flowing, so just keep that in mind. So be considering the whole SIT life cycle from test cases through to data, the test process, engagement and communications, test tooling and reporting in general, so anything you want to bring into the mix. And if the conversation reaches a natural conclusion in any given session, we can wrap it up early, but we will run the other sessions. So if you do think of something in between and you want to raise it in a subsequent session, then you can. As I say, post sessions, recordings and transcripts will be published to the attendees. A summary of the themes will be played back at the appropriate industry forum. So, for example, either GLIG or PSG. And the lessons logged will be fed into a blueprint for subsequent industry programs document that the program will produce towards the end of the program, which will cover not just SIT testing, but all aspects of the program delivery. So at this point, I'm going to open up to the floor. If there's any burning items or observations that anyone wants to raise, then go ahead. If not, I may jump in with a couple of prompts. So I'll open up to the floor. John, hi.
Hi, Dom. Hi, everyone. The point I've got, which is what didn't work well for us or went well for us, is so there were some of the test cases where we were the initiator, and these test cases were quite complex, and there was no initial guidance, from the program on that front. So that delayed the execution from our side, So I think the lesson learned from us, and obviously for the program, is to maybe from the start of such a complex part, which is settlements, we will suggest there should be walkthrough from day one, on some of these complex test cases, as well as guidance as well from the program, But at some point, like I said, Stewart jumped in, and he was very helpful, and that did help us, to move things forward. But I think that was the point I was trying to pass across, that guidance wasn't there from day one.
So just to play that back to you, what you're saying is due to the nature of the test cases for settlement, they were very complex. And you may have benefited from a more granular walkthrough of the test cases themselves. Is that what you're saying essentially?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, John. Joe?
Hey Dom, yeah, I'd probably, to be honest, like extend John's point with a couple of my own. The first is that I felt during settlement testing there was probably a slight over reliance on Stuart Scott for kind of like adjudication over test cases and technical knowledge. Stuart was absolutely brilliant. We all we know how on it he was, and like I couldn't have done a lot of the settlement testing without him, but I felt that at times he probably had a lot on his plate from all of the cohorts in a similar position to me. And it just meant that there was a bit of a bottleneck there if we were unsure about a test case, how to run it, some technical knowledge that we needed to fall back on. So that would be my first point. The other one was going to be I often felt that the test scripts in settlement were often needing a lot of work. For example, it was often the case that the exact settlement report and the run that it referred to wasn't specified in the test scripts. In the later settlement tests as well, if there was an incoming or losing supply in a change of supply scenario, the exact supply in that situation wasn't specified, and that meant us as participants had to do quite a lot of sort of working out of what settlement report is being referred to at any particular point, what supplier is being referred to if there was a change of supply situation. So that did make those tests a little bit longer than maybe they could have been. Those would be my main 2 points I want to feedback.
Okay, so thanks, Joe. So in the early stages of settlement testing, obviously there was quite a lot of challenges experienced by all participants in the testing. And it was obviously acknowledged that this was a complex area. Ahead of time, we ran some kickoff sessions. We'd obviously been discussing the testing in the working groups as well. I guess what I'm trying to understand is, yes, there obviously needed to be a lot of support involved in these testings, which we picked up during testing. But what do you think we could do, or what could we recommend if there's an area of complexity like settlement in a subsequent industry program, how we could improve upon that before we started testing? Has anybody got suggestions on that?
I'd suggest a couple of things. I think some resources on hand and ready to go that explained exactly how to, for example, reconcile every rep report that we might expect. And also, if the cohort level program leads were more empowered to adjudicate on things like passing certain steps with observations, that would get us to the resources that we need for technical knowledge a little bit quicker, and also it would unblock some of those moments where we needed a bit of like flexibility with our test case approaches. Similar to how in functional and migration testing there was a little bit more in terms of like the cohort level program support guys were probably more equipped to help than I felt that we had in settlement.
So do we think that was down to the specialist nature of the knowledge involved in settlement? Do you think there just wasn't enough of that available across the program and participants?
Yeah, probably not. As in, yeah, I'm agreeing.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Joe. Sean?
Yeah, just to back Joe's point up, I think because we requested some videos to be created by Helix on how to actually do the calculations, and they were exceptionally helpful. But I think they should have been there from day one due to the knowledge and exactly what Joe was saying, the knowledge and understanding of how we get from point A to point B. Without those videos, I'd still probably be doing settlement testing now. And then I think the second point that my colleague made was just the point of the fact that some SAT defects were found after completion and sign off. So is that what can be looked at for that? Should we have signed SAT off while defects were still being found? It's come back from a colleague.
Sorry, yeah, I'm not sure. So are you talking about the Helix SAT testing?
Yes. So after we'd done our ratification of the SAT tests based on Helix, it got signed off. Therefore, everything started being closed down, and then in defect calls, defects were then subsequently found. Should we have been allowed to exit SAT with the fact that defects were still being found? Is a question I've been asked to pose to this audience.
Okay, so I'm not aware of any defects that were raised after the event. So obviously we completed the SAT regression testing. We'd completed the settlement CA testing, but in between time, obviously Helix were closing off their settlement SAT testing internally. So at which point are you saying defects were raised afterwards?
So I believe it's their internal testing still found defects after we had done ours to support Helix. Is what we did an internal retrospective, and this was what I was told had happened, and this is what I've been asked to ask.
Okay, I mean, Stuart, keep me honest here, but I think there was 2 planned cycles of SAT testing within Helix. The first cycle, I think internal defects were raised and resolved, and we took a build into the test environment. But subsequent to that, I'm not aware of any more changes that went into the build.
So there weren't any. We did the revised testing on that second build, so I don't think there was any outstanding post that. But I think if I read into that, Sean, just in terms of where it's got to, I guess it's the alignment of test phases to make sure there's more confidence that whatever builds went through, we process them in the right order rather than to come back and do it again. I think that's more the point. Is that correct,
Yeah.
Sean?
Yeah, that's probably what was going on. Yeah.
Fine. I think we get that and note that we were reacting to that as well. But yeah, I think that's a fair comment.
Okay, so hi Joe.
Sorry, I feel like I'm bringing a few points to the table. Forgive me, but I just thought of another sort of point that I could feedback. I thought with the settling normally cases in particular, any kind of huge test that involves multiple MPANs, I'd probably prefer to have had them broken down a little bit more into separate tests, even if they were identical tests that were just segregated more by MPAN type. That would have made more sense to me, because what we found was if one of the 8, 9, 10 MPANs that we were using, if there was a problem with it, there was a little bit of confusion around, well, do we restart the entire test? Do we just sort of like cut our losses and carry on with the remaining MPANs? It got a little bit confusing and we didn't quite know where we stood with it. So I think in future, if there are similar tests that need to be conducted, breaking them down into more granular separate tests would make more sense to me.
Okay, so maybe structuring the test cases at an MPAN type level would be your suggestion.
Possibly, yeah. And I mean,
I
can't think of any like situations where we'd have to do a big sort of settling normally style test again, but I guess it's just the point of those huge multi-MPAN tests. I would personally prefer them to be broken down a little bit more into smaller parts.
So yeah, no, I take your point. So you could have had a success on, say, 9 out of 10 MPAN types, but you've got an issue on one, but therefore the whole test is then deemed a failure in some senses. But if it was broken down differently, it would be 9 tests that had passed, and therefore you'd know where you're standing against that one particular MPAN type. Maybe a little bit easier to see what the state of the stability and quality of the system is. Is that do you think that would be better?
Yeah, all absolutely spot on. And it just keeps things easier to keep track of, just from a human perspective as well, because sometimes we've got a little bit lost in the single test and the many steps and the many MPANs.
Okay. Richard, hi.
I think it's gone into my head as Joe was saying those things, but I think it was particularly in that test where, and I guess from his side as a supplier, and then you're working with the smart, the advanced, and the unmetered data service, and then you've got the test all in one. It just made that test a bit more complex than perhaps tests were in the other phases in terms of its setup in the systems. So you're breaking out the segments or keeping smart, advanced, and unmetered completely separate out of a would have maybe been more helpful there.
Okay, so M-pan types and segments maybe is a better way to structure these. Yeah. Okay, Sean, again.
Just while you're writing that point, I was also thinking, due to how long it took for people to get the settling normally test case out, if it had been broken up slightly better, it might have been a more valid viewpoint where you could see where the problems were lying, instead of just a huge test case that took forever to get over the final stumbling block of step 300 or whatever it was. You might be able to see a more granular advance of how the test was looking if it had been broken down slightly. It's just a thought.
Yeah, settling normally was one very huge test case, wasn't it? And it, through that early stage where everyone was trying to get through it, kind of reporting that to interested stakeholders was very difficult as a consequence of being such a large test covering so many things. So I think, in the benefit of hindsight, I think we could say that breaking it down in a more granular way into different components of the settling normally test may have been better in order to be able to see exactly where we were. Okay. Any more thoughts around the settlement tests, the testing execution itself, maybe the data setup, anything along those lines?
Something else, John, I am sorry. I think I also did notice some of the test cases where we are more on the happy path side. There were very limited negative test scenario, that was involved, So, for instance, there was a time where we saw an if 21 was sent, with the wrong JSP group, and it went through the system, and and then it failed a reconciliation, on the supplier side, and there is a defect. However, it took us time to pinpoint what the issue was. There wasn't any exception that got triggered, out of that scenario, So I think, we lacked a lot of negative test cases, in settlement, to be honest.
So what's the point you're making there, John? That you stumbled across an issue, but it wasn't by design?
No, it wasn't by design. It was we just felt the most of the test cases for settlement was more the happy path side. There wasn't a lot of negative test cases or exceptional trigger test cases. If you see what I'm saying.
Sure. Okay. I mean that is the risk-based approach that was taken on the program. However, you feel that there should have been more negative coverage in scope. Is what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
And you feel there's a risk associated with that, do you?
It could be possible, I'm not sure, but like I said, like I mentioned the scenario, we found out where A21 was sent with the wrong JSP, and it went through the system, and no one found out until after a long time. They were going through the XML and stuff like that. They had to pinpoint that, but there wasn't any trigger. There wasn't any exception that got triggered for that on our side as well as the program side.
Okay, Stuart, any comments on that?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just coming off mute. So I think there were a couple of scenarios like that where we did find a few things like that. But I think, again, back to your point, Don, I think that was by design in terms of we weren't expecting to see those scenarios. So I guess the only bit we could do differently was introduce some additional test cases with known errors, I guess. But the error trapping, generally, we found most things. I think it was just sometimes you didn't always look in the right place at the first time because you weren't expecting it. I think that's the standard process. But I guess the good side of that is it sort of mimics what will happen in production systems, because that's exactly the code base, and that opens up the service management arrangements. So I guess, yeah, there's two ways of looking at it. One, risk-based testing, we should have done a bit more. The other one is, I guess we got some early insight value into what you would receive in that scenario in the real world.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. Okay, so a couple of takeaways I'm hearing from this so far is obviously there was the complexity of the test cases. And one of the recommendations, it sounds like, could we break those down into a more granular structure? And that would be our recommendation around complex set of testing like this in settlement. The other one is it sounds in terms of sort of knowledge transfer into the test teams, that should be emphasized, and taken to your point, Sean, about the videos that were created by the Helix team. Perhaps if that had been in place before we started originally, that would have helped move things along. So again, making sure that we've got that level of complex knowledge transfer in place for testing of this nature. In terms of the data setup, was there anything that anybody noted or observed around that? Was there complexities apart from the fact that the test case was grouping together a number of MPAN types and segment types into a test case? Were there any challenges that anyone felt in terms of the data setup? Hi, Joe.
Yeah, I suppose just one thing is that we found every so often that when we were reconciling, that the data that we were looking at were being impacted by MPANs used elsewhere, and that caused some problems because it meant that we couldn't reconcile with the results that we would expect. I don't think there was ever one reason for that, but maybe one.
Was this when we were working in SIT B or SIT A?
Oh, I'm not sure if I even remember now.
Because there were occasions, weren't there? We were running at risk in SIT B, and we were running multiple scenarios because obviously we were trying to recover time. So you're saying that you lost the chain of events on certain MPANs, and it confused the results and the reconciliation for you.
Yeah, so to be honest, I can't remember if it was SIT B or SIT A, but I remember a lot of the test steps were often, we want to see no change for this particular, say, duos tariff group or consumption component class group, and then we would see change and we trace it back to an MPAN that's being used for a test elsewhere.
Right.
And so we could explain the change and that's fine, but it just meant that extra hurdle had to be overcome in terms of working out why we were seeing a change, and it all got a little bit convoluted and complicated. I think it's a challenge to avoid that, and I don't know if you can avoid it every single time, but yeah, that's just one thing that did slow us down at points.
Yeah, I think if we look back at what we were doing, there was quite a lot of delay in the plan, and one of our options was to run some of the test cases in parallel with others, noting that there could be a risk here. And it sounds like that did materialize in some cases and made it more difficult. I guess we were all grappling with the fact that it was either that or we would run completely sequentially and therefore know that we'd ring fence the data for the test case that was under test. But we didn't really have the luxury of time to enable that either, did we? So it is a difficult one. I'm not entirely sure what the answer to that is, but it is an observation to note, and to possibly come up with a different approach that enables you to ring fence the data. But like I say, I'm not entirely sure what the answer would be to that.
Me neither. But I just thought I'd raise it as an observation.
Need some thought, but yeah, it obviously created a problem, didn't it? Or created complexity in some places. Confusion in terms of whether the results were valid or not on certain tests. Richard, hi.
Just as a very generic comment on the MPAN data on this one, this was the one area where I felt we didn't have enough MPANs assigned. That's not necessarily an issue of the settlements itself. It was just the data that was provided, and then when we found MPANs that were getting used for setting normally, I think it was the second time round, then got picked up by another test, it just caused all sorts of confusion, and there was no spare MPANs to go with. So it's just that generic comment that more data would have been better.
Yeah,
to be able to play with. And
how much more data, or was it the actual nature of the data that was provided? Is it once you looked at these MPANs in your own environment, did you find that some of them were unusable for you, or
we had
it just?
I certainly remember. I can't remember which test it was, but whichever one where we only had 3 MPANs in each cohort, and then we immediately had one that was unusable because there was an issue on the UMSO side with it. And then another one we found in one of the joint cohort tests, it got picked up and a change of supplier got done on it, or change of data service. If we had the smaller a pool of MPANs, obviously, and when you're only playing with 3 to start with, the risk is greater. Obviously, it wasn't a showstopper at the end of the day, and we all got around it, and there was enough data to do what was needed. But
it potentially could have created more opportunity to progress. Yeah. Hi, Sean.
Yeah, just linked to that, something I was going to raise in the earlier call but didn't get a chance, is it was the MPAN tracker. That needs looking at. It was chaotic with how it was working with filters, freezing panes, and it just wasn't doing what I think the plan was by John Wiggins for it to work. And then it was overlaid, and if something broke, what happened with Richard, if something was broken within the MPAN tracker, they'd reset it, but any changes between the reset and what we'd done would be lost. So then someone would pick that MPAN up and break it. So I think that ties into Joe. But yeah, it's the MPAN tracker. It needs something slightly more robust potentially. I don't know what, but yeah, it's something that probably will have caused a lot of issues with data selection.
So what was the just for examples, what was the actual impact to the testing of those issues that you described? Was it that you were checking out data and then found out that someone else had changed it or selected it themselves, or
potentially yes? So yeah, it was difficult to use the tracker because there was it was being used by a lot of people. It was being used as in freezing panes or locking out of filters that meant you couldn't physically see your filters. There was points where we didn't think we had any data left for a test. That's because something had happened within the tracker, and therefore John and his team had to go and put it back. But then again, in that window, any changes that had happened between the last one that they had saved that was usable and what we were using, you're then picking MPANs that we might have already kicked tests off on, and then you break them even worse. So yeah, there was a couple of examples of that. For the settlements, I agree with Richard. There probably wasn't enough MPANs, but I also know that there was a limit on the number of MPANs Helix could run on the SAIRs. So that was causing issues as well, because there was only a set number of MPANs to cover exactly what we needed. And as soon as a couple of those were broken, we were scrambling.
Okay, so yes, there was the Helix constraint, and take the point around more data would have been useful if it was available during this testing. In terms of the MPAN tracker solution, do you think that an Excel-based solution is not really scalable for a test team of this size working together? Yeah.
Or it should have been locked down with a password protected, as in you can't mess with this, and this, and therefore it would work in a slightly more better environment with everyone from. Well, I got 4 testers diving in. I'm sure Joe had multiple testers. Richard, everyone had multiple people in it at different times trying to do things all at the same time, which was causing your screen to suddenly change and be like, hang on, that's not what I was looking at. So I don't know. I know that you guys were trying to build something as an MPAD selection tool that I know we ended up with the Excel spreadsheet, but we are where we are. It's just, is there a way of doing something slightly more password protected or built?
Or just more robust that enables a large number of users to interact with it, and more controlled. Okay. Okay, in terms of engagement and communication, so through the life cycle of the settlement testing, we obviously did, as I say, there were discussions that happened in the working groups preceding it. We did have kickoff meetings, we had daily calls. Obviously, you talked about the videos being very helpful as well. In terms of the communications, the engagement in general, was there anything around that area that people had observations about that we could potentially recommend improvements on? Sean, hi.
So yeah, one from me possibly. I know that there was a couple of SMEs at Helix that were exceptionally helpful when we got hold of them. But I know they were later in the phases of settlement testing, they were doing other things. I assume it was the SAT work, but that's when we were under the pump and trying to get settlements done in a timescale to allow us to get out of SIT B. So maybe it's maybe requesting that external SMEs there is at least one available more readily than I know that when I could get hold of Hugo, etc. They were fantastic and helpful. But there might have been a couple of days delay for us to have a call because they were doing other work. So, it's just one thing to think of.
So the recommendation would be, don't underestimate the need for the SME access, and that needs to be scalable at the time that participants are doing the execution, so that it's available. Yeah. Okay. Richard?
I'll just add on the engagement on this one that if we were to compare, from my perspective, comparing settlement to any of the other SIT phases, this one had the most thorough detail. This one had the clearest guidance with those sessions that will be run ahead of each of the testing phases. So that's a positive thing to look at, and I appreciate probably less tests and settlement than some of the other test phases that meant they could be drilled down to in a bit more detail. But I think that worked and was helpful and gave just the better clarity on what was needed.
And would you say that was as a consequence of the daily stand-ups, or was it the pre-meets, or a combination of both?
It was a combination of both, really. They played into each other, really, but the sessions that usually Stuart was running, obviously, to cover where we were and who was doing what each day, did help.
Okay, good. Anything around the test tooling and reporting in this particular area? I know we didn't really cover that too much in the session earlier, so if you want to break out into a more general discussion on these areas, that's fine. John, hi.
Yeah, I think for me, this is on a good path. I think the test case management in ADO was fantastic. The centralized view, the split across cohort, was good, and collaboration between participants supporting each other where required with queries, data prep, and stuff like that. I think it was fantastic.
Okay, that's good. That's positive. Did you find that it was better in cycle 3 when everyone was working the same ADO project? I can't remember, John, when you joined the project, were you involved in cycle 2?
I wasn't, so cycle 3 was when I joined, so it was good.
Yeah. Okay, that's good, positive. And any other views from anyone else? Richard, hi.
I think this was probably said earlier as well, Dom, but obviously the change that occurred after cycle 1, and I know it came up a lot in that retrospective day that we all did down in London, that losing the cohort anonymity helped you guys obviously with the reporting. But yeah, those daily reports I thought were extremely thorough and detailed and clear in terms of who was where and what we were doing. So
yeah, so
all positive in that respect.
Did you find that it was helpful to see the position across all cohorts testing when we removed that anonymity? Did that give you a better sense of where everything was, where the key issues were, more so than before?
Yeah, I'm struggling to remember what the reports looked like when we were in cycle 1 of functional, for example. But we certainly were looking and paying attention to where we were compared to others, and obviously where there were particular blockers. So it was good in that respect.
Okay, so that's something to take forward. I think
generally can't recall what it looked like in cycle 1.
Yeah, sure. It's a long time ago now.
Yeah.
I think that would be my key recommendation, is that going into SIT, if you've got a large number of participants, it's key to efficiency and transparency to waive that anonymity. I think everyone will be better off as a consequence of that policy.
I think naturally people signing up to a program again in the future will know what we're signing up to, and if that's part of the terms, I'm sure people won't have an issue.
Okay. Anything more to say on the focus area of settlement? No. All right. Let's just open it up more broadly then. So obviously there was quite a bit of activity on the call this morning. Was there anything else anybody wanted to raise before we timed out? Hi, Richard.
Oh, and I'll go once more then. This applies to settlement. It probably applies to a number of the test phases. This is me going general now. Something I found difficult to follow at times during testing was knowing when some of the central activity, like the secured active and gate closure, were occurring, because across the environments or on different tests or on different days, they were sometimes running at different times. And I think the general keeping things as close to a BAU type process as possible would have been more beneficial to understand or realize sooner when things weren't working, or because we did run into problems from time to time, obviously throughout the whole of SIT where things didn't occur. So I think having a clearer clarity or picture on when those types of core central activities were running would have helped.
Okay. So in terms of gate closure, I think that was pretty stable throughout in SIT A. Was it sort of moving between SIT B and SIT A that you had an issue, or?
I mean, it probably first came to fruition more when we were doing non-functional testing, right. But there were certainly differences. And I don't personally, I don't think I was ever entirely clear if it was running at exactly what time on certain days. But it was only later in SIT, I guess, that we then started to notice a knock-on impact of that not occurring on time.
Right. Okay. So perhaps that could have been clearer in the DITL for different stages of testing.
That would be fair.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Richard. Okay. So as I said at the top of the first session, and I'll restate here, if we are coming to a natural close on this conversation, then we can close off this call now. But if you do think of anything else that you want to bring up in the next section that you haven't brought up in this one, then please do go ahead. I'll just pause briefly, put one last call out if there's anything else wants to raise on this session. No, don't see any hands, so we'll close off there. Thanks everyone, and we'll see you again at 9 tomorrow. to talk about NFT and PIT. Thanks all.
Okay.
Thank you.